They thought they were mocking her. When her husband died, Elena Moore's in-laws handed her the deed to a rotting cabin on the edge of Glenvale, saying it was worth $3, maybe less. But on her first night there, the floor gave way, revealing a staircase carved in stone, and beneath it a secret that would change everything she thought she knew about her husband's death, his family, and the land they built their empire on. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about loss. It's about truth rising from silence. Like and subscribe for the full story. It was a gray morning in Vermont, the kind of morning that made the air taste of rain and metal. The church bells had already stopped tolling when Elena Moore stepped out into the drizzle, her black coat heavy with grief and mud. Behind her, people whispered, some with pity, others with that particular brand of curiosity that clings to tragedy. Daniel's funeral had been small, far smaller than she expected. His family, the Moores, occupied the first two pews as though they were performing grief for an audience. When the priest said his final amen, they rose as one, polished and cold, offering Elena no hand, no word, only nods carved from stone. She didn't mind, not anymore. Her hands trembled as she tightened Lila's blanket and reached for Noah's fingers. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered. "We're going home." But home was gone. Later that afternoon, the family lawyer summoned her to the old Moore estate on the hill, a Victorian monster overlooking the river, all brick and shadow. The air smelled of cedar and disapproval. Edgar Moore, Daniel's elder brother, sat behind the oak desk like a judge. His wife Christine perched beside him, lips painted the same color as spite. "Let's keep this brief," Edgar said. "My brother's estate was simple. You were married less than 6 years. You'll find he didn't leave much behind." Elena swallowed. Daniel had insurance, and his share in the company all handled. Edgar cut in. "You'll receive a settlement for the children's sake. The rest remains in trust." He slid a thin envelope across the desk. "And this," he said, almost smirking, "is what he left specifically to you." Inside was a property deed. Address: Wislow Cabin Route 89. B. Sale value $3. For a moment, Elena thought it was a joke. Then she saw the signatures, Daniel's notarized months before his death. The room tilted. Christine laughed softly, a sound like glass breaking. "A fitting inheritance," she said. "A $3 cabin for a $3 wife." The words struck like frost. Elena stood, her voice steady, though her heart stung. "Whatever he left, I'll accept." She gathered her children and walked out without looking back. Outside, rain thickened into sleet. Her car, a second-hand Subaru, waited by the gate, coated in a dull sheen of cold. Noah climbed into their back seat, silent, watching his mother through the fogged window. "Mom," he said quietly, "are we poor now?" She smiled, though her lips trembled. "No, honey. We just have less stuff to clean." He grinned faintly, trusting her as only a child can trust. The drive to Wislow Mountain took nearly 3 hours. The road narrowed into pine forest where mist hung low, and the world smelled of wet bark and loss. When she finally saw it, the cabin crouched at the edge of a clearing, leaning to one side, as if ashamed of itself. The paint had peeled down to bone. The porch sagged like a sigh. Inside, it smelled of damp wood and forgotten winters. But there was a fireplace, a working sink, and when she opened the shutters, light spilled in, pale and kind. For the first time since Daniel's death, she exhaled. That night, after tucking Noah and Lila into a makeshift bed, she sat before the fire with Daniel's wedding band in her palm. It glowed dully in the light, catching the tremor of her breath. "You left me this?" she whispered, half to him, half to the silence. "Why?" She thought of his last words before the accident, how hurried he'd sounded over the phone. "If anything happens, don't let them decide for you." She hadn't understood then. Now, sitting among boxes and ghosts, she wondered if he'd tried to warn her. The wind pressed against the cabin walls, and somewhere beneath the floorboards, something shifted, a faint creak, like breath. She told herself it was just the timber, old and settling. But a strange unease rippled through her, a sense that the cabin wasn't quite empty. She rose, checked the locks, and when she returned to the fire, Lila stirred, crying softly. Elena held her whispering lullabies until the baby slept again. Then she sat in the glow of the embers, eyes wide open, listening to the storm. She did not yet know that under her feet lay the truth Daniel had died to protect. For now there was only the sound of rain, the slow heartbeat of the fire, and a woman trying not to fall apart. By dawn, the storm had passed. The forest glittered with frost, and the cabin, for all its ugliness, looked almost peaceful. Elena brewed weak coffee on the old stove, wrapped a blanket around Noah, and stepped outside. The sun rose through the pines, a thin line of gold. For a brief, impossible moment, she felt Daniel beside her, the warmth of his hand ghosting over hers. "We'll make it work," she whispered. "I don't know how, but we will." Behind her, the floor creaked again, deeper this time, as if something or someone was waiting to be found. The storm returned before evening, crawling across Whistlow Mountain like a living thing. Rain struck the windows in hard, unsteady bursts, and the cabin groaned with each gust of wind. Elena had spent the day unpacking the few belongings that had survived the move. A box of children's books, a small kettle, a faded photograph of Daniel smiling beside the Vermont River. She placed that photo on the mantel as if it might somehow bless the place. Noah tried to help collecting broken twigs from the porch and arranging them like tiny bridges across puddles. He was quiet, though. Too quiet. That silence in children always frightened her, more than crying. By dusk, the power flickered twice and died. The cabin sank into a thick hush, broken only by the hiss of the storm outside. Elena found the old oil lamp in a cupboard and lit it, the flame trembling like her heartbeat. Shadows spread across the walls, stretching into strange shapes that danced with every draft. She told herself not to be afraid. Fear had no use here. There was too much work to do. She cleared away the broken chair legs, swept piles of leaves from the corners, and dragged a dusty rug toward the fireplace. It was during this mindless rhythm of cleaning that she saw it. Beneath the rug, etched faintly into the wooden floorboards, was a carving so delicate she might have missed it entirely, if not for the glint of lamplight. She knelt, brushing away dust with the sleeve of her sweater. The outline formed a bird in flight wings, outstretched tail forked like a swallow's. The carving was old, the grooves filled with grime that spoke of decades, maybe centuries. "What is that?" Mom Noah's voice made her startle. He stood behind her, holding Lila's bottle eyes wide. "A bird," she said softly. "A swallow, I think." He nodded thoughtfully, as if that answered everything, then crawled beside her to look closer. "Maybe someone lived here who liked birds," he said. Maybe she whispered, but something about it felt deliberate, like a mark meant to be found. She traced the swallow's wings with her fingertips and felt a faint depression beneath a gap between the boards. The thought of hidden compartments flashed across her mind, but she shook it off. It was probably nothing an old craftsman's whim, a symbol of good luck. Still, she couldn't stop looking at it. The bird seemed almost alive, mid-flight, straining towards something unseen. The rain worsened as night deepened. Water seeped under the door, pooling near the hearth. Elena grabbed towels, trying to stem the flow, but the wind was relentless. A sudden clap of thunder rattled the cabin, followed by the sharp crack of splitting wood. The floor lurched. She screamed for Noah to move back. One corner of the room buckled inward, boards snapping like bones, and part of the rug vanished into the darkness below. For a moment, the world went silent, except for the rain's steady drumming. Noah clung to her waist. "Mom, is the house breaking?" "It's okay," she said quickly, though her voice betrayed her. "Stay right there." She held the lantern close and peered toward the hole. The floor had given way near the swallow carving, revealing a round wooden hatch sealed tight with an iron ring. It was old, older than the cabin itself, its surface stained dark by time and water. The smell rising from the gap was cool and earthy, like the breath of something buried. She knelt beside it, wiping mud from her hands, and tugged lightly on the ring. It didn't budge. The wood around it felt strangely solid, reinforced. She ran her fingers along the edge and found faint carvings there too. lines that matched the swallow's wings above. The realization sent a shiver through her. Whoever had built this place had wanted to hide something and mark it. "What's down there?" Noah asked. His voice wavered, curious and afraid at once. "Probably just an old root cellar," she said, forcing calm she didn't feel. People used to keep food underground. But she didn't believe her own words. The hatch didn't look like any cellar door she'd seen. It looked like a secret. She told Noah to take Lila to the bedroom to read her a story from the box of books. When he hesitated, she smiled. "It's okay, honey. Go on. I'll fix this floor before it rains again." He nodded reluctantly and disappeared down the short hall. Alone, Elena crouched beside the opening. The lantern's flame cast trembling light over the hatch, over the broken edges of the floor. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She felt foolish. This wasn't a movie. There was no buried treasure, no hidden fortune. But there was something about the silence beneath the way the air seemed to draw inward that made her skin prickle. She fetched a screwdriver from Daniel's old toolbox, the one thing she'd kept from the house they'd lost. When she wedged it under the edge of the hatch, the metal scraped softly like a sigh. The wood shifted, but only slightly. She tried again, harder. A low groan answered. Then nothing. "Fine," she whispered. "You win tonight." She set the screwdriver aside and pushed the boards back into place as best she could, covering the hole with the rug. But the image of that swallow stayed burned into her mind. She sat near the fire, rocking Lila, when the baby stirred, watching water drip rhythmically from the window frame. The storm's fury had faded to a steady drizzle, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had awakened below. Sometime past midnight, she heard it again, the same deep creak she'd dismissed the night before. This time it came from the same corner where the floor had collapsed. A slow, measured sound, as if someone or something was moving under the boards. She rose, every muscle rigid, clutching the lantern. But when she stepped closer, the sound stopped. Only rain, only wind, only her heartbeat echoing in her throat. She told herself it was the wood swelling from moisture. Old houses did that all the time. She told herself not to be ridiculous. But when she looked down, she could swear the swallow's wings had caught a different glint in the lamplight, as though carved lines were shifting ever so slightly, almost like they were breathing. The storm outside softened into mist. The night deepened until even the fire gave up its light, leaving only the sound of dripping water and a woman holding her child, staring at the floor, wondering if the dead had left her one last message to find. Morning came slow and cold, the kind of light that made everything look washed out and uncertain. The rain had passed, leaving behind a heavy silence that seemed to cling to the cabin like another layer of dust. Elena woke with the taste of sleep still bitter in her mouth, her body sore from the uneven floorboards. Noah was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the rug, tracing the carved swallow with a stick, as though it were a puzzle to be solved. She watched him for a long moment, wondering if children sensed truths adults tried to bury. "Breakfast?" she said softly, and he looked up with a smile too small for his face. After they ate the last of the oatmeal packets, she sent Noah outside to play near the porch and laid Lila down for her nap. The sound of the baby's steady breathing steadied her too. She returned to the corner where the floor had buckled and pulled the rug back again. The smell of wet earth still lingered. She crouched, pressing her palm flat against the wooden planks. Beneath, she felt an uneven vibration, faint but real. Not movement exactly, more like air shifting in a sealed space. It unsettled her enough to fetch the screwdriver again. This time she was ready. With every twist of her wrist, the boards complained. After a few minutes of work, one plank splintered loose, exposing the hatch below. She set the lantern close. The iron ring was cold and stiff edges eaten by rust. She braced her feet, gripped tight, and pulled. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a sigh escaping from a throat long closed, the hatch lifted. The smell that rose up was older than rot, something mineral like stone and rain. She leaned closer and saw the first steps of a staircase descending into darkness. She hesitated only a moment before grabbing the lantern. "Stay outside," she called to Noah. "Don't come in until I say." He must have heard the tension in her voice because he answered with a simple, "Okay, Mom." She drew a long breath and started down. The air grew cooler with each step, thick with dust that clung to her throat. The walls were carved from rock, the staircase surprisingly narrow but solid under her feet. At the bottom, she found herself in a small chamber. The ceiling curved low, and the stone was damp to the touch. In the center stood a rectangular object, draped with a decayed sheet. When she pulled it away, she found a chest made of iron. Its surface etched with symbols she couldn't read, loops and crescents intertwined like vines. Her pulse quickened. She touched the lock and felt the metal crumble beneath her fingers. Time had already done the hard work. The lid lifted easily, protesting with a groan. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She unfolded it slowly, revealing several sheets of thick parchment bound with leather cords. The writing was faded, but still legible, done in careful calligraphy. The title inked across the first page read, "Deed of Morwen Land. Holdings Year of Our Lord, 1417. She stared at the date, hardly believing. Daniel's family had always spoken of their heritage, though never with details. His mother liked to boast of distant English ancestry, but no one had ever mentioned the name Morwen. Elena turned the pages carefully, recognizing seals and signatures that looked official, perhaps royal. The documents detailed acres of land along the Glenvale Riverland that matched the boundaries of the very region where the Moors now held vast properties. The realization struck her like a physical blow. This was a record of ownership, centuries-old proof of inheritance that predated every claim Daniel's family had made. At the bottom of the chest was a smaller envelope, newer than the rest. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. The paper was yellowed, but not ancient, sealed with a smear of wax. Her name was written across the front in handwriting she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. Elena. She sank to the damp floor, barely breathing as she broke the seal. The letter inside was short, the words slanted and uneven as though written in haste. "If you are reading this, it means they did what I feared. Trust no one, not even my brother. The truth lies beneath the house they despise the most. You will understand soon. Forgive me. Daniel." Her chest tightened. She read it twice, 3 times, tracing his name with the edge of her thumb. The ink had bled slightly, the signature smudged by water, but there was no mistaking it. Daniel had known something. He had wanted her to find this place. The cabin, the insult of it, the mockery had been deliberate. A hiding place disguised as humiliation. Mom Noah's voice floated from above, faint and anxious. "You okay down there?" She swallowed hard, forcing strength into her tone. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'll be up soon." She stuffed the letter into her jacket pocket, folded the parchment bundle, and placed it gently back into the chest. The lantern flickered throwing shadows that crawled along the walls. For a second, she thought she heard movement deeper within the chamber, a faint shuffle, like someone exhaling just out of sight. She froze, listening. Silence. Only the drip of water somewhere in the dark. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't entirely alone. She scanned the stone walls, noting faint carvings similar to those on the chest circles intersecting at their centers. One of them near the far corner looked freshly disturbed. The dust around it had been brushed away recently, though by what or whom she couldn't guess. She touched the mark and felt cool air seeping through, suggesting another passage behind the stone. Her mind raced with possibilities, but fear began to edge out curiosity. She took one last look at the chest, at the history it contained, and whispered, "What were you trying to tell me, Daniel?" The lantern sputtered its flame, shrinking to a thin thread of light. She hurried up the steps, clutching the papers tight. When she emerged into daylight, the first thing she saw was Noah on the porch, holding Lila against his chest, eyes wide with worry. She smiled, though her hands shook. "It's okay," she said. "I just found some old things." He looked at her skeptically, but nodded. Inside the cabin, she spread the documents across the table. The pages smelled of dust and rain, and something else, something like destiny. The words were hard to read, written in archaic phrasing, but one phrase repeated several times: House of Morwen shall remain under blood and oath. She didn't understand it fully yet. It filled her with a strange sense of belonging, of being tethered to something larger than her grief. Outside, wind brushed through the trees, soft but insistent. Elena folded Daniel's letter once more, pressing it to her heart. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew they would take everything, and you still tried to protect us." A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Then from beneath the floorboards came another sound, a dull, rhythmic thump, steady as a heartbeat. She froze, listening, the papers trembling in her grasp, as the lantern's light quivered over the swallow carved into the wood. The wind howled through the valley that morning, carrying the smell of pine and rain-soaked earth. Elena sat at the small kitchen table, surrounded by the yellowed parchments she had brought up from the underground room. The lantern's glow softened the sharp lines of her face, making her look older, wiser, though the sleepless night still clung to her eyes. Noah and Lila were playing with wooden spoons on the rug nearby, their laughter faintly echoing in the quiet space. She wanted to hold on to that sound, that fragile normalcy, but the papers before her spoke of something larger than any family's peace. Each page revealed a fragment of history, of landblood and betrayal. The first document she studied bore the seal of King James, dated in 1623, referencing the confirmation of an older property claim first granted to Elias Morwen in 1417. The descriptions matched the same rolling hills and river valleys she had passed on her drive into Glenvale. As her finger traced the intricate boundary lines, a realization began to settle deep in her chest. The entire region, nearly 15 square miles, had once belonged to Daniel's ancestors. It wasn't just a story his mother had told at dinner parties. It was fact, inked into history by royal decree. The parchment named every neighboring estate, every stream, every hurdle, and they all formed one vast map of possession, a map that ended precisely where her cabin now stood. The map itself had been folded carefully inside another bundle, labeled Surveyor's Chart, 1798. She smoothed it open and found tiny annotations written in a hand similar to Daniel's. His great-grandfather's, perhaps, notes about Old Wells property stones, and a signature confirming that the land had never been sold or surrendered. The ink had faded, but the message was unmistakable. According to these records, every acre surrounding Glenvale still legally belonged to the Morwen line. Her breath caught in her throat. Elena thought back to that day in Edgar Moore's office, the sneer, the laughter, the word $3 thrown like a stone. She could almost hear Christine's voice again, mocking her from behind polished teeth. But now, looking at the papers, she saw it for what it was, a desperate attempt to bury the truth. The Moores hadn't given her the cabin to humiliate her. They'd done it to rid themselves of it, to keep her far from understanding its worth. She turned to another packet in the chest, this one newer, written in English that belonged to another century. The header read Glenvale Bank and Trust, 1952. The document was a loan agreement signed by Thomas A. Moore Daniel's grandfather. Her eyes moved across the lines, slowly translating legal phrasing that made her stomach tighten. It was a confession in ink. Thomas Moore had used property that didn't wholly belong to him as collateral to pay debts from his failing lumber business. The total loan amount was massive for the time, and in exchange he had transferred temporary titles to large sections of the Morwen land to the bank. But the final clause was what froze her blood. Clause 7. The property known as Parcel 0 Wislow Cabin remains exempt from lien serving as the holding deed of heritage claim until such a time as the full family estate may be resolved. She read it twice, then a third time, the words swimming before her eyes. Parcel 0 Wislow Cabin, the $3 house. It was the last piece of land never legally transferred, the root of the entire estate. Thomas More hadn't sold it because he couldn't. The cabin was the legal anchor that connected the Morwen title to the land surrounding Glenvale. To lose it would mean losing every claim to the family's inheritance. Elena pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You knew." Her eyes blurred as the pieces fit together. Daniel's grandfather had tried to hide the truth. His father had expanded the family's wealth using land that wasn't truly theirs. And when Daniel found out, they must have tried to silence him. The accident, the unanswered questions, his sudden trip before he died. It all led back here to this mountain, this cabin, this quiet place full of secrets. Outside, the wind rattled the windows and Noah looked up from his play. "Mom, are you crying?" he asked gently. She wiped her eyes quickly and smiled. "No, sweetheart, just reading something important." He seemed satisfied with that and went back to his game, but her heart was a storm. She picked up Daniel's letter again, running her fingers over the smudged signature. The words took on new meaning now. They did what I feared. Go to the house they despise the most. He had left her the one thing they couldn't touch, the one thing that would expose everything. Not a curse, but a key. She folded the documents and placed them back in the chest, keeping the bank file in her lap. The light from the lantern flickered, as if it too struggled to breathe. She could almost feel Daniel's presence beside her, quiet and protective. His voice seemed to echo in her mind, soft but urgent. "Don't let them take it." Her thoughts turned to Edgar Christine and the company Daniel had once co-owned. If what she held was authentic, then their entire fortune rested on stolen ground. Every warehouse, every mill, every contract built upon the Glenvale lands would collapse if the deed was challenged. But to challenge them meant stepping into their world again, the world that had mocked her and dismissed her grief. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Elena leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The sound of rain returned faintly, whispering through the chimney flue. The cabin creaked as though it too remembered its purpose after decades of silence. She thought about the swallow carved into the floor and how it symbolized return, the promise of homecoming after long journeys. Perhaps the one who carved it had known that someday someone would find their way back. A knock startled her. 3 soft raps against the door. Her breath caught. No one should be here. She stood slowly, gathering the papers into a pile and sliding them under the loose floorboard near her feet. When she opened the door, wind swept in cold and sharp, but no one was there. Only footprints in the mud, fresh leading away from the porch toward the tree line. She stared until the fog swallowed them. Behind her, the lantern flickered once more and went out. The room plunged into shadow, the faintest scent of burnt oil lingering in the air. She could hear Lila stirring in her cradle, a small whimper followed by silence. And from beneath the floor where the hatch lay hidden once again came that same soft, rhythmic sound. 3 dull knocks, exactly matching the ones at her door. The following morning was sharp and clear sunlight spilling through the trees like the world had forgotten the storm. Elena stood on the porch, gripping the folder that contained the deeds and Daniel's letter. She hadn't slept. The knocks from the night before still echoed in her ears, steady as a warning. But there was no more time to hesitate. The truth she carried could either set them free or destroy them completely. She loaded Lila's stroller into the car, told Noah to bring his book, and started the engine. The mountain road wound downward through fog and silence until Glenvale town appeared in the valley below, a small patchwork of red brick buildings and an old courthouse that had seen more years than any living resident. When she parked, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, pale, resolute, with the faintest tremor in her lips. "We're doing this for your father," she whispered. Inside the courthouse, the air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old paper. The clerk, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, directed her to the property records office. Elena spread the parchment documents on the counter and asked to verify their authenticity. The clerk adjusted her glasses, eyes widening as she scanned the seals. "These are very old," she murmured. If legitimate, they could change a lot of things in this county. She was about to fetch a supervisor when the door opened behind them. The sound of leather soles on tile made Elena turn. Edgar Moore stood in the doorway, immaculate in his navy suit, his expression unreadable. "Elena," he said smoothly, his tone practiced warmth, masking something colder. "I was told you might be here." The clerk, suddenly uneasy, excused herself. They were alone. Elena met his gaze without flinching. "You followed me," she said. "I came to stop a mistake," he replied. "You found some old stories, that's all. Ancient myths written on fading parchment. Nothing that can stand in a court of law." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know grief makes people see ghosts, but you're about to ruin what's left of Daniel's name if you keep chasing this." "What I found is real," she said quietly. "This land was never yours to sell. You built your fortune on something stolen." Edgar's smile vanished. His voice dropped to a whisper that felt like a knife. "You think you understand what you've uncovered? That cabin you're so proud of, it's not salvation, it's a grave. The past doesn't forgive. If you dig too deep, it'll bury you." He straightened his jacket, the charm returning to his features. "Go home, Elena. Burn the papers. Raise your children and forget this nonsense. It's your last warning." And just like that, he turned and walked out his cologne, lingering long after he was gone. Elena stood frozen, pulse hammering in her throat. She gathered the documents and hurried outside, heart pounding, as she scanned the parking lot. Edgar's black Mercedes idled near the curb, his driver watching her in the rearview mirror. She lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated, and drove away. The entire way back to the mountain, she replayed his words. The past doesn't forgive. By nightfall, she had locked every door and window in the cabin, tucking the documents beneath a loose board under Lila's cradle. Noah helped her light the lanterns, pretending not to notice how her hands shook. "Is something wrong, Mom?" he asked. She forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. I'm just tired." But deep down, she knew Edgar would not let this rest. Men like him didn't threaten. They acted. The forest outside was unnervingly quiet, as if holding its breath. Somewhere far off, an owl called once and went silent. Elena stayed awake long after the children slept, sitting near the fire, with Daniel's ring clenched in her palm. Every creak of the wood made her flinch. At some point, exhaustion pulled her under, but it was a shallow, uneasy sleep. She awoke to a noise, a metallic scrape, faint but deliberate. Her eyes flew open. The fire had died to embers and the cabin was cloaked in darkness. She listened. Another sound, closer this time. The soft press of footsteps on the floorboards. Someone was inside. She reached for the lantern, turning the knob slowly until the flame bloomed weakly to life. Its dim light caught the reflection of a shadow moving near the table. A man dressed in dark clothes bent over the floorboard where she had hidden the papers. Panic surged. She snatched Lila from the cradle and whispered urgently to Noah, "Quiet, baby, stay with me." They slipped through the back door, barefoot, into the cold night. The forest wrapped around them like a black ocean, branches whispering overhead. Behind them, she heard the crash of wood, someone overturning furniture, searching. She pressed a hand to Noah's shoulder. This way she breathed, guiding him down the slope. The moon broke through the clouds, then silver and sharp, lighting their path between the trees. She turned once just enough to see the cabin silhouetted against the pale sky, a figure standing in the doorway holding a flashlight that swept across the yard like a searching eye. For a terrible moment, it caught the glint of her hair. She ducked lower, holding her children close as she crept farther into the woods. The man's voice carried faintly through the wind, muffled but distinct. She took them check the back. They ran until her lungs burned. When she finally dared to look back again, the flashlight beam was gone. They huddled behind a fallen log, Lila whimpering softly. Elena rocked her, whispering prayers she didn't fully believe. Then, through the thinning mist, she saw headlights on the road below an SUV pulling away from the cabin. The moonlight caught the chrome license plate just long enough for her to read the first 3 letters. EM3. Edgar Moore's car. Her blood went cold. He hadn't just warned her. He had come for what was hidden. She pressed her forehead against Noah's hair and whispered, "It's him. He knows." They stayed there until dawn, shivering in the damp earth as the forest slowly brightened with the first light of day. When the birds began to sing, she rose, her body aching, her mind a blur of fear and fury. The documents were gone, but she still had Daniel's letter, and the truth burned in her memory. Whatever Edgar thought he had stolen, it wouldn't be enough. She had seen his face when she said the word stolen. He was afraid, though, he'd never admit it, and fear could be used. She would have to be careful, smarter than she'd ever been, but she would not be silenced again. Dawn broke pale and uncertain over the forest. Elena stood in the clearing behind the cabin, her hair damp with dew, her arms still trembling from the long night of fear. The documents were gone, but the truth burned inside her like a live coal. Noah slept against her shoulder, exhausted, while Lila dozed in her arms. She waited until the sun lifted above the tree line before carrying them back to the cabin. The door hung crooked on its hinges, the lock splintered where it had been forced. Drawers were overturned, the floor littered with papers and broken glass. Whoever had searched the place had been thorough. She stepped carefully, scanning for what they might have missed. The chest from the underground room lay open beside the hearth, its contents scattered. Yet something inside it caught her eye. A small envelope wedged beneath the lining, yellowed and sealed with wax. Her breath hitched. She lifted it gently, reading the words written across the front in Daniel's neat hand. "Do not open until you believe yourself." For a long moment, she simply stared at it, the message echoing inside her like a whisper. She wasn't sure what Daniel had meant. Believe herself. Believe what? That she could survive without him. That she could uncover whatever he had died trying to protect. Her fingers trembled as she held it, feeling the faint impression of the seal under her thumb. She thought of Edgar's voice, calm and poisonous, telling her that the past would bury her. Maybe Daniel had known it would come to this, that his brother would one day stand between her and the truth. She hesitated, her mind torn between fear and need. Finally, she broke the seal. Inside were a few folded sheets of paper and something rigid, a photograph. The edges of the picture were worn, the colors faded, but she recognized the faces instantly. Daniel stood in the center, his smile unguarded, his hand resting on their father's shoulder. To his right, slightly turned toward the camera, was Edgar, his expression tight, almost forced. Behind them loomed the half-built frame of a new construction site, a place Elena had seen once when Daniel took her to see his family's company at work. It was the last project he had overseen before his death. On the back of the photograph, written in the same hurried scrawl as the earlier letter, were 8 words that stopped her breath. "The one you trust most could be the one who kills you." She read the line again, her hand shaking so hard the photo nearly slipped from her grasp. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt, her vision blurring, as if the air had been pulled from it. She sank to her knees, the photograph pressed against her chest. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered the name breaking apart in her throat. "You knew? You knew all along." The world outside blurred into soundless motion, the wind brushing through the trees, a raven calling from the eaves, but inside the cabin there was only her heartbeat and the dull ache of realization. He hadn't died in an accident. He had been hunted, cornered by his own blood. The car that spun off the bridge, the missing black box, the investigation that went nowhere, it all made sense now. The truth she had been too afraid to name was staring back at her from the photograph. Edgar's eyes, even in that frozen image, held something sharp and secret, something she had never seen before, because love had blinded her to it. Tears came then, slow and unrelenting. She covered her mouth to keep from waking the children, but the sobs tore through her all the same. Every memory of Daniel flooded back, the way he laughed with his whole body, the way he whispered to the baby at night, the way his hands always smelled faintly of cedar and soap. She remembered the last phone call, his voice strained but tender. "If anything happens, promise me you'll be brave." She had thought it was grief speaking, but now she understood it was fear. He had known someone was watching him, and he hadn't told her because he wanted to protect her. She stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the cold floor, clutching the photograph as though it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. When the tears finally stopped, she looked around the wrecked cabin, noticing small things she hadn't before: the boot prints near the door, the faint smell of gasoline, the scrap of black fabric caught on a nail by the window. Edgar hadn't just sent someone. He had been here himself. The thought chilled her more than the morning air ever could. He had walked inside this house, stepped across the floor where their children slept, searching for the secrets his brother left behind. It was no longer just about property or inheritance. It was about silencing her. She rose slowly, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. Her reflection in the cracked window startled her eyes. Red Jaw said a woman she barely recognized, staring back. For the first time, she saw herself not as the widow who had been pitied and mocked, but as someone capable of standing against them. "You tried to warn me," she whispered to Daniel's ghost. "Now I see." She slipped the photograph into the lining of her coat, where it rested close to her heart. The words on the back burned in her mind. "The one you trust most could be the one who kills you." She had believed Edgar's charm, his practiced kindness at the funeral, his promises to look after the children. Now those memories twisted into something cruel. Noah appeared at the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, are we going to stay here?" he asked softly. She turned toward him, her voice gentler than she felt. "For now, sweetheart, but we might need to leave soon." He nodded, sensing the weight behind her words, and went to comfort Lila, who had begun to fuss. Elena watched them, her heart aching with both love and terror. She couldn't run forever, but she also couldn't let Edgar win. Somewhere in these documents, somewhere in Daniel's hidden messages, was the proof she needed to expose him. She would have to find it before he found her again. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last threads of mist. The forest looked deceptively peaceful, but Elena knew better now. Somewhere down that winding mountain road, Edgar was waiting. She gathered her courage, straightened the overturned chair, and began cleaning the mess one piece at a time, her movements steady, deliberate. Every sound, the creak of wood, the rustle of paper, felt sharper, more alive, as if the house itself understood the storm that was coming. The morning she decided to go to the authorities, the sky hung low and gray, the kind of gray that made every sound sharper, every decision heavier. Elena stood by the window holding Daniel's photograph, the one with the words that had changed everything. Noah and Lila were still asleep, wrapped in the warmth of ignorance, their dreams untouched by the darkness pressing at the edges of their world. She knew she couldn't protect them from it forever, but she could make sure the truth didn't die with her. After dressing quietly, she packed the photograph, Daniel's letter, and the remaining documents into a folder wrapped with twine. She would take them to Glenvale, to the one person she believed might still listen. The law office was small, tucked behind the florist near the courthouse square, its windows lined with ivy that had grown wild over the years. The brass plate on the door read, "Emma Linton, Attorney at Law." The name had stayed in Elena's mind since Daniel's funeral, when a young woman with auburn hair and tear-streaked cheeks had approached her, whispering, "Your husband saved my life once. If you ever need anything, come find me." Now, months later, Elena finally did. Inside the office smelled of old books and lemon oil. Emma looked up from her desk, her surprise quickly turning to concern when she saw Elena's face. "Mrs. Moore," she said softly, "you look like you've been through a war." Elena gave a tired smile. "In a way, I have." She laid the folder on the desk. "I need someone I can trust." Emma opened the folder, glancing through the pages. Her brow furrowed as she skimmed the deeds and the bank files. "These are extraordinary," she murmured. "Where did you find them?" "In a house your town thinks is worthless," Elena replied. "My husband left them for me. He wanted me to find the truth." Emma read silently for several minutes before looking up, her expression solemn. If these are real, the Moore Corporation's entire land holdings could be contested. This, she tapped, the oldest parchment is a direct line of ownership, but proving it will be difficult. They'll have the best lawyers money can buy. I don't want their money, Elena said. I just want justice for Daniel. Emma studied her, something like respect lighting behind her eyes. Then we'll start there. Over the next week, they worked together in secret. Emma contacted historians to authenticate the documents, traced the original seals through archives, and cross-checked the Glenvale Bank's records. Each day brought new fragments of proof. Thomas Moore had defaulted on his loan in 1955, then forged extensions under a false holding company, registered under a different name. The deeper they dug, the more tangled the lies became. At night, when exhaustion overtook her, Elena would sit by the window of the cabin, watching the forest shift in the wind, her mind whispering Daniel's name. It gave her strength to know she wasn't alone in this anymore. One afternoon, Emma arrived at the cabin with a thick envelope. "You need to see this," she said. Inside were photocopies of recent land transfers. Dozens of properties, small farms, woodland parcels, even parts of the Glenvale riverfront had been sold within the past 2 years to a company called Havenbrook Holdings. Emma pointed to the fine print. Havenbrook is owned by a trust registered to Edgar Moore. He's been selling off family property under a shell name. Elena frowned. "But that land belongs to the Morwen estate. It's in the deed." "Exactly," Emma said. "And look at the dates he started doing this, just months before Daniel's death." Elena's hands went cold. "He was cleaning house," she whispered, "selling everything before Daniel could expose him." They drove to the courthouse the next morning to file the first claim. The clerk's expression shifted from politeness to alarm when he saw the signatures and seals. "You're reopening a royal deed claim?" he asked. Emma's tone was firm. "We're reasserting ownership rights tied to the Morwen line. These properties were never legally surrendered." The clerk nodded uncertainly and began stamping the forms. By the time they left, a hush had fallen over the hallway, word spreading among the few people who understood what such a claim meant. Within days, Glenvale buzzed with whispers. Some pitied Elena, others feared her, but most simply waited to see which way power would shift. That evening, Emma received an email from an anonymous source, an internal audit from the Moore Corporation itself. Attached was a spreadsheet listing every fraudulent sale Edgar had authorized over the past decade, complete with signatures forged to appear as Daniel's. Elena stared at the screen, her heart breaking all over again. "He used Daniel's name to steal from his own family," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded grimly. "And now he'll have to answer for it." They printed the documents and locked them in a safe at the office, double-checking every copy. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The same black SUV she had seen outside the courthouse now lingered near the corner of Main Street headlights, dim engine idling. When she pointed it out, Emma's face tightened. "You should stay at my house tonight. It's safer." But Elena refused. "If I run, he wins." She returned to the cabin, her every step echoing with Daniel's memory. When she reached the door, she paused, listening. The forest was quiet, except for the hum of crickets. Inside, she lit the lamp and placed Daniel's photograph on the table. The words on its back had become a promise, now not a warning. She whispered, "We're almost there, Daniel. I'll finish what you started." She didn't know if he could hear her, but the silence that followed felt softer, almost approving. Over the next few days, Emma prepared the court filings while Elena gathered witness statements and archived letters. Each new piece of evidence stitched together a story of greed and betrayal stretching back 3 generations. At times, the weight of it threatened to crush her, but she pushed forward. She could almost see Daniel's face, proud and sad all at once. When the formal case was finally submitted, the courthouse clerk said quietly, "This will shake the whole town." Elena managed a small smile. It's time it did. As she stepped out into the sunlight, the air smelled of rain again, heavy and electric, as if the sky itself was holding its breath for what came next. The day of the hearing arrived beneath a sky that felt too bright for what it carried. Elena stood on the courthouse steps, the morning sun glinting off the marble columns, her breath clouding faintly in the crisp Vermont air. She clutched the same worn folder she had carried through every sleepless night, the one that had once been hidden beneath her floorboards. Around her, journalists murmured, cameras clicked, and the townspeople of Glenvale whispered her name as if it belonged to a myth. Emma Linton stood beside her, steady and calm, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Once we file this motion," she said quietly, "they'll have no choice but to open the case on Daniel's death. Are you ready?" Elena nodded. "I've been ready since the day I buried him." Inside the courtroom, the air was tense with expectation. Edgar sat at the defense table, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile hollow. He didn't look at her at first. Only when the judge entered did he finally turn his head, offering the faintest nod, as though they shared some unspoken understanding. But there was nothing left between them now, except truth and consequence. The proceedings began with Emma presenting the evidence, the original Morwen deeds, the forged transfers, the fraudulent company filings, and finally the photograph Daniel had left behind. The words on its back were read aloud for the record. "The one you trust most could be the one who kills you." A ripple passed through the courtroom. Edgar's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming against the table. When Emma introduced the forensic report on Daniel's accident, the silence deepened into something electric. The report had arrived 2 days earlier, after Emma convinced the state police to reopen the case. The investigators had examined the wreckage of Daniel's car, which had been stored for years in an impound lot. Under new analysis, the brake line showed clear signs of tampering. The cut was too clean to be from impact, the edges polished by a tool. A thin residue of lubricant remained, a mechanical compound used in precision workshops. The lead detective testified in a calm, deliberate tone, explaining how such tampering could have been performed by someone with access to Daniel's vehicle before the crash. "In my professional opinion," he said, "this was not an accident. It was deliberate." Gasps filled the room. Elena felt the blood rush from her face, her hands gripping the bench in front of her. Edgar whispered something to his lawyer, but his confidence had slipped. The judge leaned forward, his voice firm. "Mr. Moore, are you aware of any employee or associate who would have had access to your brother's car in the days prior to his death?" Edgar hesitated just long enough for the truth to reveal itself. "No, Your Honor," he said finally. "But my brother was reckless. He had enemies." His tone was smooth, practiced, but it no longer carried conviction. Emma rose. "Your Honor, the only person with documented access to the vehicle was Mr. Edgar Moore himself, recorded on security cameras at the company garage the evening before Daniel's final trip." She turned toward him. "Would you like to explain what business required you to be there at midnight?" Edgar's mouth opened, then closed. The silence stretched painfully long before he spoke. "He called me," he said. "He wanted to talk. So you admit you saw him that night," Emma pressed. He nodded once, realizing too late what he had conceded. The judge noted something on his pad. The gallery erupted into murmurs. Elena watched it unfold as though she were underwater, her heart pounding too loud to hear anything else. All the years of pain, all the doubts she had buried, suddenly they had formed sound and consequence. The truth was finally being spoken where the world could hear it. By midday, the court recessed for lunch. Outside reporters swarmed around her, shouting questions about the investigation, about the estate, about the accusations. She said little, only that she wanted justice, not revenge. The crowd's curiosity shifted to Edgar, whose once untouchable composure had begun to crack. He brushed past the cameras, his face pale, his lawyer struggling to hold back the swarm of microphones. "No comment," he barked, retreating into a black car that sped away down the courthouse hill. That afternoon, the judge delivered his preliminary ruling. The court recognized the validity of the Morwen deeds and declared Elena Moore the sole heir to the Glenvale Holdings land and assets valued at nearly £6 million. Gasps rose again, followed by the soft clicking of camera shutters. But Elena didn't feel triumphant. She felt something deeper, almost unbearable, a release of pressure that left her hollow. Emma touched her shoulder. "It's done," she said. "You've won." Elena shook her head slowly. "Not until Daniel's name is cleared." As if summoned by her words, 2 uniformed officers entered the courtroom. One approached the bench, handing the judge a sealed envelope. The judge read it, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Edgar Moore," he said gravely, "based on new evidence submitted by the state police, you are hereby detained for questioning on charges of fraud, obstruction of justice, and potential involvement in the death of your brother, Daniel Moore." A collective breath swept through the room. Edgar stood, disbelief written across his face. "This is absurd," he protested, but the bailiff was already beside him. For the first time, Elena saw fear in his eyes, the kind of fear that strips a man of every illusion of power. As he was led away, their gazes met. For a moment, she almost pitied him. Then she remembered the night she ran through the woods with her children, his headlights glinting like a predator's eyes. And pity turned to resolve. When the gavel struck, signaling adjournment, the courtroom erupted in noise. Emma hugged her tightly, whispering, "It's over." But Elena wasn't sure it ever would be. She stepped outside, into the sunlight, blinking against its brilliance. The square below was filled with faces, neighbors, reporters, strangers, all looking at her with something between awe and respect. She had been the widow no one believed, the quiet woman with nothing, and now she stood at the center of a storm she had never asked for. The wind lifted her hair, the sunlight warm on her face, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. Yet even in that brightness, she felt Daniel's absence like a shadow behind her heart. She whispered to herself, "We did it, love. They finally heard you." As she walked down the courthouse steps, a single sheet of paper slipped from her folder, caught by the wind. It tumbled across the pavement, landing near the fountain. When she picked it up, she realized it was one of Daniel's notes from the folder, a map of the property boundaries. The ink faded, but the lines unmistakable. Near the bottom, he had scribbled something in the margin she had never noticed before. "Find the rest. It's not over yet." Her fingers tightened on the paper, her pulse quickening. The sunlight that had felt so warm a moment ago now seemed almost blinding. The morning after the verdict, Glenvale felt almost too quiet. The news had spread overnight. Every radio, every television channel, every headline carried her name. Elena Moore declared sole heir to historic Morwen estate. Brother-in-law arrested for fraud. But behind the headlines, beyond the fascination of strangers, there was a silence she couldn't shake. It was the silence of loss, the kind that lingers even after victory. She sat on the cabin's porch with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands, watching the mist rise from the valley. The old house, once filled with shadows and secrets, now seemed peaceful, almost grateful. The same oak trees that had once frightened her now swayed gently in the morning light. Yet peace didn't come easily. Every victory carried its price. Later that afternoon, a journalist from the Glenvale Chronicle arrived. His suit was too crisp for the country air, his notepad already half filled with questions. "Mrs. Moore," he began, his tone eager but cautious. "You've just inherited land and assets worth nearly £6 million, and your brother-in-law faces serious charges. How does it feel to win so decisively?" Elena looked at him for a long moment before answering. Her eyes were tired but steady, the way someone looks when they've learned what victory costs. "I didn't win," she said finally. "I survived." The words caught him off guard. He blinked as if expecting something triumphant, not something raw, but she didn't explain further. She didn't owe anyone that. He thanked her awkwardly and left the echo of her words already finding its way into tomorrow's headlines. That evening, she walked the fields that once belonged to Daniel's ancestors, their names etched into deeds now bearing her signature. The land smelled of rain and grass, of history heavy with both beauty and pain. Noah ran ahead, chasing fireflies with the same laugh Daniel once had, while Lila toddled close behind, holding a dandelion like a scepter. Watching them, Elena realized that no amount of property or judgment could bring her peace, but purpose might. Over the following weeks, she met with accountants, lawyers, and representatives from the state's Heritage Council. Every conversation ended with numbers and valuations, but her heart stayed elsewhere. She didn't want to restore the manor or build monuments. She wanted to rebuild lives the kind shattered quietly, like hers once had been. One evening, after putting the children to bed, she sat by the kitchen table with Emma, going over the final paperwork. "You could live anywhere now," Emma said gently. "You could start over." Elena smiled faintly. "Maybe this is starting over, just not the way people expect." She slid a document across the table. At the top, in crisp lettering, it read, "The Daniel Moore Foundation." Emma's eyes softened as she read the mission statement beneath it. Providing housing, education, and legal support for widowed mothers and survivors of domestic violence. "He would have loved this," Emma said quietly. "He always said helping one person meant more than saving a fortune." Elena nodded. "Then it's his legacy, not mine." Over the months that followed, the foundation grew faster than she'd imagined. Letters poured in from women she'd never met, from mothers who had fled abuse, from widows trying to raise children alone. Each letter carried the same refrain, "Thank you for understanding." She read every one, sometimes with tears, sometimes with quiet strength. She began hosting monthly gatherings in the restored barn behind the cabin, inviting women to share stories, meals, and laughter that felt hard-earned. The first time she stood to speak before them, her voice trembled. "I know what it's like to lose everything," she said, "and I know what it's like to keep breathing anyway. You are not alone." When she finished, the room was silent, then filled with the sound of applause that didn't feel like celebration, but solidarity. The police investigation into Daniel's death continued for months. Though the evidence against Edgar was overwhelming, new questions kept emerging: names, transactions, old debts. Justice, she had learned, was not a single moment, but a long, uneven road. When the district attorney called to inform her that the charges against Edgar had expanded to include conspiracy and homicide, she felt no triumph, only exhaustion. The law would decide his fate. Her fight was elsewhere now. One Sunday afternoon, she drove into Glenvale for groceries and found the same journalist waiting by her car, notebook in hand. "Mrs. Moore," he called. "The public's curious. What will you do with the estate now, with all that money?" She paused, keys in hand, the wind tugging at her hair. "I'm giving most of it away," she said simply. "There are people who need it more than I do." His eyebrows rose. "All of it enough to make a difference," she replied, then smiled faintly. Daniel used to say, "We don't own what we keep, only what we give." The quote made the evening edition, accompanied by a photo of her standing beside the cabin, the valley spread out behind her. The headline read, "I didn't win, I survived. Widow turns inheritance into hope." She didn't read it, but she knew its message mattered. As autumn came, the trees around Glenvale burned gold and crimson. Elena spent her mornings walking the property boundaries, her evenings writing letters for the foundation. Noah started school. Lila began to talk in full sentences, and slowly their laughter replaced the echo of grief that had once haunted the house. Sometimes she still dreamed of Daniel, never in the moment of his death, but in the quiet after. He would be standing in sunlight, smiling the way he used to when the world still made sense. When she woke, she always felt steadier, as though some part of him still walked beside her. One evening, as she locked up the foundation's new office in town, a renovated library she'd purchased for community programs, Emma stopped her at the door. "You know, Emma said people are calling you Glenvale's saint now." Elena laughed softly. "Then they've never seen me lose my temper with a broken printer," but her smile faded as she looked at the darkening sky. "I don't want to be anyone's saint, Emma. I just want to make sure no one else has to beg to be believed." That night back at the cabin, she stood by the window, the same one where she had once watched headlights in the rain, and waited for courage. The valley below shimmered with light from the town, her reflection faintly superimposed over the stars. She whispered Daniel's name, not in grief this time, but in gratitude. Outside, an owl called from the trees, and for the first time the sound didn't make her shiver. It simply reminded her she was still here, still alive, still fighting, still hers. The wind carried the faint scent of apples and rain as dusk settled over Glenvale. A year had passed since the trial, though it felt both longer and shorter in her heart, as if time had folded in on itself. The cabin, once broken, weathered, and nearly forgotten, now stood proudly at the edge of the valley, its windows glowing like small lanterns in the fading light. Inside, laughter drifted through the open door, where Elena sat at the worn wooden table, finishing the last of the letters for the Daniel Moore Foundation. Outside, volunteers were packing up after the evening's small celebration, a quiet anniversary gathering marking 1 year since justice had been served. There had been no champagne, no speeches, only music from a local violinist and the sound of wind through the apple trees she had planted in the spring. It was enough. Noah, now 9, sat across from her, drawing something on a piece of paper, while little Lila slept upstairs. His hair had grown long, curling slightly, like Daniel's once did, and every time she looked at him, she saw the reflection of the man she had loved, the same steadiness in his eyes, the same quiet soul. "Mom," he asked suddenly, lifting his head, "why did people laugh when they gave you the $3 house?" His voice was innocent, curious, unburdened by memory, but the question landed softly in her chest like a prayer. Elena smiled, her fingers pausing over the letter she was folding, because she said they never understood that sometimes the smallest things hold the soul of an entire family. She looked toward the fireplace where Daniel's photograph still stood framed by wildflowers Noah had gathered that morning. They thought they were giving me nothing, but they gave me everything that mattered. Noah tilted his head. "Like what?" "Like the chance to start over," she said softly. "The chance to find who we really are." He smiled, satisfied, and returned to his drawing, a picture of their cabin with a tall apple tree beside it and 3 little hearts carved into the trunk. She felt a lump rise in her throat, but forced herself to keep breathing through it. The sound of rain began to fall outside, gentle at first, then steadier, drumming on the roof in that familiar rhythm she had once feared and now found comforting. The rain no longer meant loss to her. It meant cleansing, renewal. The same rain that had once revealed the secret beneath her floorboards now washed away the weight of everything she had endured. When the guests had gone and the lights in the valley flickered out one by one, she stepped outside. The air was cool, filled with the scent of wet earth. She carried a small sapling in her arms, a young apple tree she had chosen from the orchard that morning. Its roots were bound in burlap, its leaves trembling in the wind. She walked to the edge of the clearing where the old oak had fallen years ago, the place where it all began. There, beneath the same sky that had watched her break and rebuild herself, she began to dig. The soil was soft from the rain, rich and dark. With every scoop, her memories came back, not in pain this time, but in gratitude. She remembered Daniel's laughter echoing through their first apartment, the way he used to whistle when he cooked, the way he had brushed his thumb against her wrist when words weren't enough. She remembered the look in his eyes the night before his last trip, the worry he tried to hide. She remembered how she had promised him she would be brave, and somehow through everything she had kept that promise. When the hole was deep enough, she placed the sapling inside, covering its roots with careful hands. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, worn at the edges but sealed with Daniel's handwriting. She had found it only weeks before, tucked behind a false panel in the chest's lid, a letter she hadn't known existed. For days she couldn't bring herself to open it. Tonight felt right. The candle she carried flickered in the wind as she broke the seal. His handwriting appeared faint but steady, as though written in quiet certainty. "If you're reading this, it means you made it through the storm it began. And I hope the world is kinder to you now. If there's another life, another chance, I'd build this house again from nothing but faith and 3 small coins as long as you were there." The words blurred through her tears. She pressed the letter to her chest, breathing in the damp night air, and then knelt to place it in the earth beneath the young apple tree. The soil closed gently over it, cradling the last echo of his voice. "You kept your promise," she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. "Now it's my turn." She stood for a moment looking at the tree swaying in the rain. A soft wind rustled through its leaves, and for just a heartbeat, she thought she heard him. His laughter, low and familiar, carried through the valley like a song. It wasn't imagination. It was memory turned to music. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Later that night, after the rain stopped and the stars came out, she sat once more on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders. The world felt wide and quiet, alive in ways she couldn't explain. She watched the moonlight glimmer on the wet grass, listened to the distant hum of crickets, and thought of how far she and her children had come from fear to freedom, from loss to legacy. Inside, Noah had fallen asleep beside his drawing. The apple tree in his picture now had blossoms where there had once been only branches. She smiled, tracing the tiny hearts he had drawn at its base. In them, she saw her family's entire story, pain and hope, grief and grace, all stitched together by the smallest acts of love. The wind rose again, carrying the faint scent of apples from the tree she had just planted. It moved through the valley like a voice, soft and certain, whispering through the leaves, through her heart, through everything that would remain after she was gone. She closed her eyes, the tears finally gentle. "We're home now," she whispered into the wind. And in that moment, she believed it. If this story touched you even a little, take a moment to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to hear what part stayed with you most. Was it the discovery under the cabin, the moment of justice, or that final apple tree in the rain? Tell me where you're watching from, and share how this story made you feel. Your thoughts and memories are what keep these stories alive.